whatever it would be, and you're left with nothing once that comes through. If you have 10 different species of tree and only one of them is an oak, you only lose one tree when that disease hits here. So good to keep things diverse, and it really reduces the chance of losing everything in your landscape. Diverse plantings resist failure.
Quick question.
Sure.
I heard about 5 or 6, maybe it's been 10 years, I'm not sure timing-wise. Chicago had all these elm trees that were infected with a beetle, a borer beetle, and they said that they were going to lose rows and streets of trees because everything was planted with that, you call it a monoculture?
A monoculture, yeah.
Okay. Any word on that? I have not heard anything since I heard that, since I saw that on TV. Is it true that it wiped out all the city's trees?
How long ago was that?
This is about, I want to say 6-8 years ago.
The question is about, in Chicago apparently, there were some streets that were planted in a monoculture of elms, and there was an insect that was a borer beetle that attacked them. Yeah, there was Dutch elm disease. I don't know.
Well, it was brought in from Vietnam with it in plywood. Okay. And they didn't check the shipment, and it came in, and they were doing building, and these borer beetles annihilated trees.
I don't really know a lot about that, to be honest with you, but certainly anytime that you have a full street planted with a monoculture, if a pest comes in or a disease comes in that attacks that particular species, then yeah, you do have a reason to worry. But I don't know about that specific example. Another good design concept to use is to use planting strips instead of small islands. Sometimes this is a code issue and you can't get around it, but sometimes you only need to have, say, X number of square feet per every so many parking spaces in a parking lot. It really depends what type of project you're working on and how much flexibility you have. But if it's an option, it's a really good idea to have one larger or several larger planting areas as opposed to those tiny little planting islands. You can't grow an oak tree in a spot like that, although people try. This is the same parking lot, and I like it for many reasons. There's a lot of diversity, and they modified this site plan. So instead of having your tiny little planting strips between maybe every 8 parking spaces, they put all of the required planting area together in the middle, and they got pretty good size for a commercial parking lot. They got some pretty good size planting space. And this is an example I like to give that is, it's palm trees, so maybe it's not as big of a concern, but I think this is not a very good design personally. If you look, how tiny are these little planting spots, and you know, there's maybe this much room for the roots to grow, and how nice would that be if they had combined all of those areas and done a planting? They could have planted the same palms and also had some understory, some colorful plantings. Would have looked a lot nicer in my opinion, but also it would have been a little more resistant to wind events. This is kind of halfway in between. I would rather see these planting spots combined to make a larger planting space for the trees, but to give them some credit, they did use tree grates here, which is a way that you can get your sidewalk area. People can still walk across them, but it's pervious soil underneath. So it's kind of a compromise between the sidewalk and the planting space. Gives the tree a little bit more room to grow. And plant trees with quality structure. If you can, it's best to start with something that's, Florida #1 or better. Sound structure means one straight single leader or trunk, evenly spaced branches, and a full even canopy. Make sure that the tree that you're selecting is free of pests, diseases, and injury. So why not start with something healthy to begin with? And check the root systems. I can't emphasize that enough. And it's only in recent years that we're really, really paying attention to the root systems of the trees that we plant. But we don't often think about them because they're underground, and what we can't see, we don't always think about. But the root system, the roots should grow straight away from the trunk. They shouldn't circle or girdle, or there are lots of problems in the future that can be caused by root systems that do. Look for straight, single central leaders. These are two examples of at least the top parts of these trees we know are pretty good candidates for placing in the landscape. There's a young 3-gallon tree, mahogany, and this is a codominant stem. So there's 2 trunks as opposed to 1, and you could maybe pass on this and find one with one straight single leader, or you could fix this with one single pruning cut. Either way, either pick a better one or commit to doing some structural pruning on this while it's young. If you cut this now, those trunks are the size of my pinky. That's not going to be too traumatic to the tree. But if you don't address it at this point, when it's going into the ground or maybe in the first year after it's planted, this is what you get. This is kind of showing up sort of dark. It's 2 different trees, but this is an example of if you didn't address that tree when it was young, you get a codominant tree, and now if you need to make one of those cuts to address the structure, they're this big, and that's a lot more harmful to the tree. And they keep growing, and if not corrected. Now, if you can see, this one had 3 actually. This one failed. The size of the trunk, it was like this. So if you had wanted to come in and correct it would have been a pruning cut this big, leaving the tree open to decay, pests, and diseases. Anytime you can, you want to make that cut that's the size of my pinky. So when you have a codominant tree like that, what happens is when the 2 trunks keep getting bigger and bigger, they're pressing together, and they don't have a solid wood connection in the middle. What they have is it's included bark. So there's nothing really connecting them, and this is a dissection of a codominant trunk, and it shows what's in there. There's no wood connection. We see a lot of failures of codominant trees after hurricanes. And this was a city tree that failed after Wilma. It had, I believe, 3 trunks. You can see up close. And this is what was inside where those 2 trunks were connecting. You have included bark and even some adventitious roots growing in there, but the start of decay was already there. So it's a very weak point in the tree. And on to the root systems. We need to think about what we're putting into the ground because it's not going to change. If you plant something with circling or girdling roots, it's not going to self-correct. It's going to keep, those roots will continue growing around the trunk. And it's a likely point of failure. It's also going to constrict the trunk, so water and nutrient movement is affected. But also, when the roots are growing in a circle, that root ball isn't getting bigger. It stays this small while the tree keeps getting bigger, and then it can't support itself as well. This is a new tree that was planted, and it was planted too deep, for one, but removing just a couple inches of soil showed a very poor root system. This is kind of looking down on the root system of a tree that had a very good root system. The roots have been cut, obviously, so it could be portable to show people, but this is how the roots should grow, straight away from the trunk. You can see the circling roots are often hiding beneath the soil and beneath some smaller roots, so it's a good idea to really inspect your root systems. And this happens. This is a very poor circling root system that was probably otherwise undetectable without removing the soil. This is why we recommend digging down into the root ball and seeing what's going on. And here's another one. You just you don't know if you don't look. And this would be a tree that would be very likely to fail. It might grow for a few years, or maybe many years, but this would very likely fail at some point. Once you have created a good design for some wind-resilient plantings, it's very important to continue to care for the tree properly. So you can get it in the right place, you can get a quality, healthy tree, but you need to continue to care for it throughout its life. And I always recommend remove staking materials. If you can't be sure that you're going to come back and remove those staking materials, don't stake the tree. It's going to have a better chance that way. In doing hurricane response, I saw so many trees where a branch or part of the trunk, something failed or fell, and more than half the time we found those tiny little green tree ties that had been left on the tree. The tree grows around it, and that's a very likely point of failure. That's right where it's going to break. So always make sure to remove the staking materials. And be sure to provide proper pruning throughout the life of the tree, which means no flush cuts, no hat racking, never removing more than 20% of the tree's crown. Ensure that the tree gets proper water and fertilizer, and protect the tree from damage. Keep the lawnmowers and weed whackers away from it. When you damage the tree, they don't just heal. So they have to compartmentalize, and they have to live with whatever damage you've done. Don't allow the soil to become overly wet. Some of the studies that have come out in recent years have shown a correlation between tree failure and overly wet soil. And when we're talking about ficus, ficus has gotten a bad name recently, and as you know, the ficus roots are very shallow. They're in that top maybe 18 inches of the soil, but they grow aerial roots, and many people don't like them. So we've seen after people cut those aerial roots off, many of the ficus have failed because of it. So leave them on the tree, they grow for support. It's an example of staking material that was left on the tree. It's so common, and always better just don't stake the tree if you can't commit to coming back to it. Here's a couple other ones. These are some really weak spots. Proper pruning includes, I received many questions about this week. A lot of people concerned about overlifted trees. This is not the proper way to trim the tree. And we see after overlifting, trees tend to fail, and it's because the center of gravity is actually moved. When you have a full healthy canopy, the center of gravity is lower in the tree, which helps it to resist failure during heavy winds and storms. When you lift the tree, you raise the center of gravity. So when we get the winds coming through, the tree is a lot more likely to fail. This is a tree that I'm sure there was more than just one issue going on, but this is a tree that was recently overlifted, and it went right over.